Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Karen Weaver. Today's guest is Dr. Marc Camille, president of Albertus Magnus College, a Division III school in New Haven, Connecticut. Marc is also the chair of the Division III NCAA President's Council, a key national group that guides issues which impact the largest group of schools within the NCAA Division III. Marc's leadership career includes more than a decade as Vice President for Enrollment Management and Communications at Loyola University of Maryland before stepping into the presidency at Albertus. Under his leadership, Albertus Athletics has seen remarkable growth, including major facilities upgrades, the addition of full-time head coaching positions, and the launch of new varsity programs in swimming and diving, women's golf, and men's and women's ice hockey. Beyond campus, Marc also brings a deep commitment to sport through his work coaching youth hockey, where he holds USA Hockey Level 4 certification, and he was a 3-sport athlete in college. Marc, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks for the very kind and overstated introduction.
That's okay. People need to get to know who you are and where your focus is. So with that background, it's not surprising to me that you are chair of the Division III Council. Before we dive into higher ed, just talk a little about what that group is and what it does.
Sure. Yeah. So I appreciate you saying it doesn't surprise you. It surprised me a little bit, but so the President's Council is the highest level of kind of governance in NCAA Division III. So, the membership consists of college presidents from around the country. We also have a couple of student members on the committee as well. And really, our charge is to work closely with the NCAA staff and really the incredibly talented and committed Vice President for Division III, Louise McCleary. So she and her team, and to try our best to represent really the best interests on behalf of the full Division III membership, but really keeping the student athlete experience near and dear and front and center in our thinking and planning.
Yeah. Well, that's enormously important, but also often forgotten in the discussion about college athletics, for sure.
Yeah.
So let's start with a broader perspective. You're at a small school as an enrollment of, you said 796. Is that right?
739.
739
traditional undergraduates. That's
okay.
right.
So you're one of those ones, and you're in the northeastern part of the United States. So you're one of those ones that we think about when we think about enrollment challenges and attracting students. What are some of the things that you're finding that are working for you?
Yeah, right. So we're right in the heart of the Northeast, and demographic declines forecasted all over the place. We know the demographic cliff is upon us in higher education. And with that acknowledgement and reality of our lived experience right now, and I'll kind of knock on wood here, but I'll say that we've been able to really buck national trends at Albertus in terms of growing our enrollment. And 739, we're still far too small and need to continue to grow. But with that being said, we're in the midst of celebrating the college's centennial anniversary this year, and that 739 is the largest enrollment the college has ever had.
Wow.
Over the course of a century. We've been able to grow it pushing 70% since my arrival 9 years ago. And while as president, oftentimes you get the privilege of sharing the good news, or, I'm the messenger here. But frankly, it's the sum of the efforts of our entire community, our faculty and our staff, just really leaning into our values and championing what Albertus stands for, and probably being more effective in marketing that and in terms of recruiting students to this campus. But in no small way, intercollegiate athletics has been a big part of our enrollment strategy. And, for a school of only 739 students, we stand up 17 sports at Albertus at the NCAA Division III level. And in any given year, it can be close to half of our students are competing in at least one sport. So it's if I go back into my enrollment management years, athletics at Albertus is part of our enrollment management strategy for sure.
Okay. And there's been some colleges that have done that for years and it's been successful, and all of a sudden it's not working. So, what
Sure.
do you think? What advice would you have for schools that are maybe not quite the same size, maybe a little larger, but think that adding more teams and having more athletes on campus is the right answer?
Yeah, well, that's an astute observation and accurate. I think maybe I would start with, if you are a chief enrollment manager at an institution that might have traditional undergraduate programs, maybe adult undergraduate programs, graduate programs, you're trying to really bring a holistic, market centered, strategic approach toward getting those enrollment dials to work over the course of not just a year, but over a period of time. In our nation, we have ebbs and flows of demand for certain programs. There are times when graduate is in high demand, undergraduate might be down, then vice versa. And so I think, thinking about the athletic context there is, making sure that the programs that you're standing up, success in building rosters. And it's something that we pay close attention to at Albertus, and, making sure that our rosters are, maxed out within reasonable expectations. And for a couple of reasons. Number one, obviously it can help with the competitiveness of a program in terms of competing, but also meeting enrollment goals and objectives. And so during my tenure, you noted at the front end, we've started some new sports, and swimming and diving, truthfully, was in the works before I arrived. Women's golf, and then in particular, women's and men's ice hockey. Um, they were brought forward because we did market studies and concluded that there was enough demand,
Mhm.
that basically there were more qualified, you know, Division 3 level ice hockey players at both the men's and women's space than spaces out there. And then we were able to really strike an innovative partnership with the city of New Haven around a facility and ice and so forth. The end result of that is we probably have a net addition of, between the two programs, 70 students that we
Okay.
otherwise wouldn't have at Albertus. And we just went through a similar analysis where, we just announced we're going to be starting track and field at
Okay.
Albertus. And again, our athletic director, our vice president for enrollment management, put together a fantastic study and business plan on why this makes sense for Albertus. And so we'll look to field our first teams in the fall of 27. And we think that once those are up and running, we'll have a net gain of maybe 50 to 60 additional students at the college. And so, in our region, in our conference, those are sports that make good sense. In other regions of the country, different decisions might be made. I think the other thing too, Karen, is sometimes, as you're really paying close attention to how programs are doing, we reached a really, certainly undesirable and really difficult decision this past year to discontinue our women's field hockey program.
I saw that. Yes.
And,
Yes.
that was not taken lightly. It was started, it's another sport that, was in the works as I was arriving. But what we, our real experience over the 8 years, before we made the decision, was, despite investing in full-time coaches and, within our means, the resources necessary for the program, we just weren't able to build a roster. And so, I mean, there was a competitive disadvantage for the success of the team, but really it was about the experience of the student athletes, that the handful that would come to us hoping and expecting to have a competitive Division 3 field hockey experience, and it just wasn't happening. And so, that's an example, I think, of, sure, you look for opportunities for growth, but you also have to assure that what you're doing is, capable of succeeding too.
Absolutely. And I would have supported you wholeheartedly in all the sports that you added because particularly in Connecticut, those are all very popular sports.
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
curious how much of your student population is in state versus out of state. Any sense of that?
Yeah, we are still in the traditional undergraduate space. We're still close to 85+% from the state of Connecticut.
Wow. Okay.
Sure. Albertus has always been, very kind of faithful to, focused on Connecticut. We've seen the percentage from Connecticut. It was probably north of 90% when I arrived. And so we've eased that a bit and have started to find some success in neighboring states. And in the case of intercollegiate athletics, no surprise here, but our hockey programs have been successful in bringing in international students to
Sure.
compete. So we've been, I would say, strategically focused on expanding our geographic footprint, but understanding, I mean, listen, close to 30 years in enrollment management for me, Albertus Magnus isn't going to hang up a sign and start to recruit oodles of students from, North Dakota, right? Our brand awareness isn't going to be
Right.
there. So,
Right.
yeah.
That's why I asked the question. I know you have this stuff nailed down to a
Well,
micro.
that's debatable.
Yeah, well, that's debatable. I don't know of any enrollment manager who thinks they've got it nailed 100%, but maybe
Yeah,
99%. There we
fair
go.
enough.
So let's shift a little bit into the world of Division III athletics and the challenges that your President's Council faces, the issues that you wrestle with. Are there themes that come through when you meet regularly with this group?
Yeah, there are for sure, and in fact, so the tenure of serving as the chair of President's Council is a 1-year appointment. So it's a really limited amount of time to provide leadership. And I spent a year as vice chair before, but your begins at the conclusion of the annual convention. So my tenure as chair started at the end of January 26.
Okay.
It will conclude at the end of January 27. So as we were tracking toward January's convention this past January, there were a number of what we're now calling tensions within Division 3 that were starting to surface and gaining enough focus and areas of concern within the membership. And, all of that to say that coming out of the convention, we committed as a president's council to charge really, well, president's council subset and the staff within Division 3 to conduct a focused analysis over the course of this year
Uh-huh.
to explore these 6 areas of tension and perhaps others to see what we might want to consider doing within the division as a membership to help either mitigate or address these tensions in the moment we're facing. Now, with that being said, I think part of the challenge we face is you have the confluence of a lot of disruption in the higher education environment to begin demographic cliff, changing federal administration and policies toward whether it's financial aid, grant funding, et cetera. So you have that going on anyway that has pressures on, in this case, Division 3 member institutions, meeting enrollment goals, budgets, et cetera. And then on top of that, you have a lot of disruption at the Division 1 level,
Mhm.
NCAA, and that filters its way down into the life of the Division 3 member institution. So the sum of all of this has percolated or kind of surfaced these tensions, but at the same time being mindful that a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, the environment could be very different. And
Yes, yes.
and this is Mark speaking on his own behalf, not necessarily on behalf of the President's Council, but my own belief in this space is you have to be careful not to be too knee-jerk reactive. I think one of the worst things we could do would be to undo some core principal tenet experience of Division 3 and in 2 or 3 or 4 years, look back and say, "Boy, that was short-sighted, and I wish we hadn't done that." And there's no
Right.
crystal ball, right? So you only make the best decisions you can.
That's right.
But I think that's a little bit of the balance that we have to strike as we move forward with this analysis over the course of this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's wise. But there's at least 2 issues, and I wanna bring them up with you that we are just seeing, and I don't think they're going away anytime soon. The first one is
Sure.
mental health issues, and
Mhm.
then the second one is gambling. And we don't talk much about either one of those things in Division 3 enough. And
Mm,
yet, as I was preparing for this conversation, I because of the, content in your from your most recent the minutes from your most recent, administrative council meeting, you all talked a lot about mental health. And
yeah.
so I've seen some other reports also specific to Division 3 athletics. So give us a sense of where that is.
Yeah, I think that, pardon the pun on this, but I think there's healthy awareness within the leadership of Division Three, the staff at the NCAA, President's Council, Management Council, the various entities that mental health and wellness is a major area of both need and really responsibility for us to try to help, today's student athletes. And so, in the past year, the Division III membership, we brought forward some grants that every college in Division III could access to help with some mental health counseling support services. There are training modules that have been brought forward. So I think there's awareness and commitment on the part of the leadership in Division III to help address this, and yet an awareness that the NCAA can't solve for that problem. I mean,
Yeah,
that it extends well beyond intercollegiate athletics. So I think there's a need and a role, and resources are being put toward that. But there's no doubt especially coming out of the pandemic. Our student athletes today have grown up in and competed in very different environments than a decade ago. So, yeah. And then, on the sports betting and gambling topic, I mean, President Baker, head of NCAA is really passionate about this topic and trying to bring forth, potential rules and regulations and policies ultimately to be the most supportive of our student athletes as we can. And, the membership even considered recently and moved toward endorsing and then kind of pulled back from it, but actually legalizing sports betting.
I saw that. Yes.
The argument there is, and there's evidence to support this, that one of the concerns is when student athletes are prohibited from any type of sports betting, we know it's still happening. I mean, research has been done, but because they're kind of having to do it in cloak and dagger, right? A little bit undercover here, the concerns are they're not maybe as likely to be forthcoming with if they've got a gambling problem so that we can help them. And
Mhm.
so there's a lot of tension with, certainly not wanting to, it's not like anyone wants to say, hey, gambling on sports is great, go do it. But at the
Uh-huh.
same time, we're fooling ourselves if we think by prohibiting it, students aren't engaging in
Right.
wagering and gambling activities. And so there's been a lot of discussion, and frankly, it's an unresolved outcome and challenge, I think, for the NCAA, in this case, Division III. We continue to study it. Our membership remains laser focused on the topic, but hasn't found the right solution, I think, on how we can, you know, be different moving forward on
Yeah.
behalf of our student athletes in the current environment.
Yeah, I think it's a huge challenge for Division 2 and Division 3 campuses for a whole host of reasons, not the least of which your teams are flying under the radar. So nobody's really paying attention to whether the line moves or, any of that type of thing.
Yeah.
There have been some resources, mostly from the private sector, online mental health counseling on demand. There's been some apps that you can report hazing and
Hmm.
and mental health issues directly to administrators on campus. Have you at Albertus tried to do any of those kinds of things?
Yeah. Yeah, we do. And it's a work in progress for us too, but absolutely. I mean, everything from online resources being readily available for our students, but also for our faculty and staff, and then, really trying to create reporting mechanisms that are comfortable for students and non-judgmental for sure, trying to deepen our resource base on campus in the mental health and wellness counseling space. So I think I think we've moved the needle for sure, I think, with our capacity on behalf of our students. But at the same time, I don't know that you'd ever say you have enough nowadays.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, the isolation of students coming out of the pandemic, I think is something that's going to be with us for some time into the
Mm.
future. We're just it's interesting, the first year class that enrolled this past fall at Albertus, our faculty and staff have observed that they are the most pre-pandemic like in their social interaction that we've
Hmm.
had since coming out of the pandemic. So maybe there's a ray of hope and sunshine here that as it gets further into the rear view mirror, the classes that are coming up through, and that will graduate high school, maybe they'll be in a better place. And, we
Yeah.
can only hope. But at the same time, we can't sit around and just hope. We've got to be proactive. And I
No
think that
question.
applies in the NCAA space too.
Well, that leads me to my next question. So, what proactively is the President's Council asking the staff to research, asking their colleagues for, anecdotal observations about the changes? I know those two areas are really important, but what else is Division 3 kind of paying attention to at this point?
Yeah, a number of other areas have surfaced that we're really honing in on. One is we'll call it the broad topic of eligibility. In this space, obviously the thought of fifth year of eligibility, redshirting, and so forth, those are nothing new in the Division 1 space. And, Lord knows with the transfer portal and waivers and so forth, you're hearing students that are in their seventh year of intercollegiate athletics or whatever.
Yeah.
Excuse me. That's not the Division 3, experience model, et cetera. Division 3 for a long time has really professed to being committed to the 4 year, you know,
Hmm.
education model. And, the philosophy still statement for Division 3 still professes to being primarily a 4 year undergraduate experience. But the lived experience in reality for many students and student athletes attending Division 3 institutions is number one, they may not graduate in 4 years, but also and this is a tension here because our commitment in Division 3 is we want our student athletes to have basically the same level of engagement and integration into the life of the college that non student athletes do. But if you are a student athlete and you want to study abroad, for example, and the only time you can study abroad in your junior year, call it, is during the playing season of your sport, you have a
Hmm.
choice to make. You give
Right.
up a year of eligibility in order to study abroad, or you don't study abroad. And that's one example. Another might be if you think about some of the academic disciplines that students are studying, nursing's a good example with clinical rotation demands.
Yeah.
Nursing students have an incredibly tough time also balancing seasons for, especially in those later clinical years. So the membership considered a proposal in this past January around basically creating a fifth year framework to play a 4 seasons, 5 years to do so, and it didn't get across the finish line, and
Hmm.
even frankly with this national SAC supported it, but there were a majority of voting members who thought that that would completely compromise the 4 year kind of
Wow.
prioritization. And so, that's an area that needs more study, because I think we've got a responsibility to be responsive to the needs of our students, to continue to uphold the principles of Division 3. But perhaps we're at a moment in time where it calls us to think more creatively or maybe adapt or flexibility. And I don't have the answers. It's
Yeah.
not for me to solve individually, but as a membership, that's something that's being looked at. The economic implications. I mean, again, talking about the higher ed environment, but listen, we all read almost on a daily basis about this school is closing or this school is in danger of closing.
Yeah.
And as that happens, it impacts certainly the students at those schools, but if a school closes, it can change the membership of a conference, and all of a sudden you
Mhm.
might have a conference that doesn't have enough members for an automatic bid. And so, the economic implications are kind of there being looked at. But then at the same time, like even championship selection criteria. How
Yeah.
do you get into the postseason? And looking at things from, the NPI, which is now the way kind of at-large bids are being doled out, to minimum sports sponsorship to be able to get an automatic bid and so forth. So, that is something that I think is being looked at. And an important one, in my opinion, too, is we've really hit a moment where looking at governance oversight for Division III and presidential engagement are two
Mhm.
important topics. If you think about it, college presidents have the highest level of responsibility for their intercollegiate athletics program.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
and that is kind of administered in different ways. Some colleges, the athletic director reports directly to the president. Others, that doesn't happen. Doesn't matter what the structure is, but ultimately that president is responsible. And at the NCAA convention in January that we just had, and I'm going to round here, but I want to say we probably had about 100 college presidents present. That's out of a membership of more than 400
Wow.
institutions.
Yeah.
And there may be many valid reasons, certainly lots of reasons anyway. But one of the things that we've committed to is really looking into this. McCleary and I have been putting our heads together around what opportunities can we create to both inspire and bring in more presidents
Mhm.
into the discussion at a deeper level of engagement around intercollegiate athletics. It calls for presidential leadership
It does.
and responsibility. So for me, that's an important one too.
I am absolutely surprised as heck to hear that because it just feels like as athletics has moved further and further into the main headlines, and it's easy to say, well, it's just a Division One issue, but your coaches, your administrators are thinking about all these implications of what does it mean for me. And as you
Hmm.
said, the president puts the NCAA puts the president as the ultimate authority, the sign off, and
That's
you've
right.
got to understand this stuff in order to be able to effectively do that.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And and I mean, it's interesting. Kind of a little bit of a self-disclosure here, but I mean, as you pointed out, I mean, I'm a jock at heart. I love intercollegiate athletics, and one of my greatest joys on campus is when my schedule affords me to go cheer on our teams, any sport. But before I was nominated and voted on to the president's advisory group,
Mhm.
I had never attended an NCAA convention.
Well, I guess as a VP of enrollment management, right?
Well, but
You
I'm
wouldn't have?
saying yes, true.
Okay.
Although, depending upon, so here, for example, my vice president for enrollment management supervises intercollegiate
Right.
athletics. So he's been to the NCAA convention. But my point is, I'm not sure that presidents even, it's just not intuitive to think that the NCAA is something that I should get involved with. And
Yeah,
so I think there's more work to be done
I
to
agree.
educate why that's the exact opposite case, you
I
know?
agree.
Um, yeah. So I just use that as an example. I mean, and I've, now that I've gone, I get it. I find great value in it. And
Mhm.
if I've been able to help provide any leadership or continue to do that, great. But I do think that's an important objective and priority too as we move forward.
Yeah, we can't be afraid not to talk about these things. They are
That's right.
impact our campus financial health, our enrollment and retention health, our campus life, all of
Yeah,
that. And presidents have got to start a fight that impulse to back away and engage. They really
for
need to
sure.
do that. Yeah.
For sure.
Mark, I can't thank you enough for joining me on the podcast today and giving us an inside look at the structures behind Division III governance and management and how important it is for presidents to be involved. So I'm grateful for your time and your enthusiasm for athletics.
Well, thanks, Karen. Yeah, it was a pleasure. And anytime I'm a phone call and email away. But no, I think it's important. It's an important area within higher education. It impacts so many students and impacts so many institutions. Like the rest of higher education right now, we're in a period of disruption, and we got to kind of try to stabilize things and maintain our calm, cool, and composure, but be
That's right.
responsive to the times, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Mark.
It's my pleasure.